In this lesson, we're going to improve implementation of our new global module called time that we have created in the previous lesson. So, since main purpose of this module is to keep track of the current time, we have to actually store the current time as a reactive variable in this module. So let's create new reactive variable and call it now. As an initial value for this reactive variable, we're gonna use current time object, like so. And actually the reason we need to make the current date reactive is for other components to be able to listen for changes in this reactive variable and respond accordingly. For example, the component which shows label of the hour. Anytime this hour becomes current, we have to highlight this hour label. But now as we can see, this does not happen and the previous hour is highlighted instead. Alright, let's keep working on the global time module. In here, we also have to know the date of the previous midnight. So let's create new variable, midnight. This will be a computed property, which will in turn depend on the reactive variable, which stores current date. And the way we can get the date of the previous midnight is as follows. First of all, let's create new date object based on the date object that corresponds to the current date. And then by calling setHours method on this date object, we can reset values of hours, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. And this way we're gonna get the date which corresponds to the previous midnight. Then let's also move the declaration of seconds since midnight reactive variable down here, right under seconds since midnight in percentage computed property. These two things are tightly connected, so I prefer to keep both of them together. So now that we have two reactive date objects, one corresponds to the current date and another one to the past midnight, we can use computed property to calculate seconds since midnight value. And the way we can do so is by subtracting the date of the past midnight from the current date and dividing resulting value by 1000, which is amount of milliseconds in 1 second. And this way we're gonna receive amount of seconds passed since midnight up until this moment. And it looks like now that function calculate seconds since midnight, which is declared in here, is never used. So we can freely remove this function. I also prefer to group all the variables and functions which are exported from some module together and move all other private variables and functions to the bottom of the file. And here's another cool thing we were able to achieve by using this refactoring. If previously we had to keep track of the changes inside of seconds since midnight reactive variable by using this watch effect function colon here, because we had to reset the value of this reactive variable whenever new day begins. But now since we have turned seconds since midnight into computed property, we no longer have to keep track of changes manually, since Vue will do it for us, because this computed property depends on other computed properties such as current date object as well as date object that corresponds to the past midnight. The value of the seconds since midnight computed property will always be up to date. So we can remove this watch effect. And also we have to handle a couple more changes inside of start timer function. So previously we have removed function calculate seconds since midnight. And just because the main source of truth now is reactive variable which stores current time, which is variable now, right before starting the timer to update this variable every second, we have to reset value of this variable and set it to the current date like this. And inside the closure of set interval function, now we will update the current date in the following way. So we will create new date object based on the previous date object. We'll get the amount of milliseconds in the date object stored inside now reactive variable and then add 1000 milliseconds. And this way we're going to make the date stored inside now reactive variable always match current date. But for testing purposes for now, let's add 5 minutes instead of 1 second to the current date, so we could see how our timeline indicator moves down. And this way we have multiplied 5, which is 5 minutes, by 60, which is amount of seconds in 1 minute, by milliseconds in second. So at the end we're passing amount of milliseconds to the date constructor and get new date object which corresponds to the current date. As we can see in the browser, we're still seeing how our timeline indicator moves down every second, and all the computed properties are properly updated. So our main source of truth, which stores current date, is reactive variable now. And this reactive variable is updated every second, because that's how often we update our timeline indicator position. And also we have declared a couple more additional computed properties which are used in some calculations, such as the computed property midnight, which stores the date of the past midnight. And then this date, as well as the current date, are used to calculate seconds passed since midnight, which is also going to happen every second, and eventually seconds since midnight in percentage will be recalculated every second as well, because this property in turn depends on another property seconds since midnight, which is recalculated every second. So as we can see how by using only one reactive variable, which gets updated every second inside set interval closure, leads to updates of all these computed properties. And eventually we are receiving this computed property seconds since midnight in percentage in the timeline indicator component to use this property in the calculation of the offset, how much we should shift our timeline indicator down. And the way we're doing it is basically using this top offset computed property as the value for the property top of the element which renders timeline indicator. And this is actually how we were able to achieve this illusion of moving timeline indicator, by basically making its position depend on the current time. At the end I'm going to go back to the global module time and from here remove all unnecessary imports. At this point we're finishing this lesson. The link to the source code of this lesson will be in the video description.